Well, the thing that stood out to me was that a lot of times we often hear about women being victims, but I don't think that we really pay attention to the men when they become victims. They kind of surprised me with a lot of the comments that I was actually reading, saying that the guy's lying, he's just trying to come up, and it was kind of the same type of comments with the Joe Budden situation when Joe Budden said that Sin was striking him, throwing things at him, and was doing things to him. And it was the same thing as far as with Tamar's boyfriend when he came out. He said some of the similar things. So the question that I ask is: are men treated the same when they are victims? Are men treated the same when they are victims? Next, you answer that question for me.
Not at all. I just think as a society that we're not there yet. I think that really, if you think about it, men aren't really encouraged to kind of speak out about things that bother them, that impact them. I don't think it's embraced. So, I mean, if anything, I think a man would be shamed if anything, was to kind of like impact a man the way it impacts a woman. So I think that men just don't talk about it.
Okay. Tawana, are men treated the same when they are victims of abuse? I'm sorry.
Of course not. I mean, there's reasons why, though. It's not justifiable that there is reasons, because men often don't report things until it's a crisis. And I think that men naturally believe that if they report something that they won't be taken seriously. And so, and it could be true, right? Because, I mean, we see those jokes, in movies, and, a man tries to report domestic violence and like the police officers will laugh at them. And so men are just not taken seriously. And then when we see those domestic violence videos, a lot of times the men are the perpetrators, right? So they're not seen as the victims. So when you see this constant, affirmation that men are the perpetrators, it's hard to see them as victims, and then if men do report that a woman is abusing them, it's sometimes they're emasculated. And so it's like, be a man, you can't fight a woman. Like, and we see this often even with women when they're raising their little boys. Like if a boy falls and he cries, you'll sometimes see the woman say, like, stop being a little punk, right? Like telling him how to behave. So it's these societal pressures that I think prevent men from, feeling comfortable with reporting these things. And do I think men are abused? Yes. Do I believe that women abuse men? Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I know it 100%. But even the act, VAWA, right? Violence Against Women Act, it's specifically targeted at women. So it's probably difficult for a man to feel like there's a space for him to report this, when there is, obviously the rules apply to both men and women, but obviously the act is named Violence Against Women, right? So men probably don't feel like, oh yeah, I should go report, my violence, in those cases. So yeah, absolutely. I think they not treated the same. No.
What about you, Anton? Are men treated the same, like treated differently when it comes to them being victims?
Absolutely not. I think it's unfortunate that there's always a double standard when it comes to women versus men, especially as it relates to the idea that women are always advocating for equal rights, right? And so the idea is that you can't have equal without having the bad that goes along with it. You know what I'm saying? So, for example, one of these things that is emphasized, and they have groups that highlight all of these issues that surround men, and that men are not treated equal when it comes to the things that women benefit from. So, for example, if you want to take into consideration child support issues, custody battles, issues related to domestic violence, issues related to shelters. There's only like 2 shelters in the entire United States when it comes to domestic violence for men, whereas in every state there's literally tens and hundreds that's dedicated to women and children. So the idea that equal rights is equal is not true or accurate and they're only supporting and advocating for it because it benefits women. Women don't ask for equal when it comes to truly being equal. So, for example, men are overwhelmingly the majority when it comes to suicides. That's not addressed. Men are overwhelmingly the person that dies on a job, right? Men are overwhelmingly the ones that fight wars. Men historically have built the country, right? But at the same time, they don't get the same rewards when it comes to identifying what role men play in society. We're always trying to fight back this whole idea behind this patriarchal society because they're saying we want the same pay, we want the same benefits, we want the same voting rights, we want all these things, which is cool, and I'm all for that. But at the same time, do you want all of the problems that come along with it? So we'd have to also address and change the narrative behind how we identify men. When I seen that post that was highlighting everything that I think it's Tamar Braxton, right? The top comments on that whole post was everything that is wrong with our society portraying men as it relates to domestic violence. Oh, that can't be true. Oh, he's trying to get over, whatever that is, right? It's trash, bro. And all I'm saying is you can't have equal without equal on both sides. And if you want equal, that means you got to change the whole narrative behind how the courts operate. You got to change the whole narrative behind how we identify and say whether men are telling the truth or not when it comes to certain issues like domestic violence. And you have to address the whole system itself if you want to truly make things equal. And then I'm pretty sure that it's going to be a larger conversation that goes into it because you're not really going to want it equal. You only want it equal when it comes to the things that's benefiting you, not necessarily all the way across the board. You don't want that. You don't want the conversation.
Hey, can I interject real quick? Because the thing is, Anton, I believe, like, I hear where you're coming from, but actually I got to go back to what Tawana was saying. There are no male advocacy groups in order to create the space. So we're talking about these patriarchal groups and these kind of the way in which men aren't embraced for that. But who creates this? The thing is, I think us as men, we created this. This almost really goes back to
one of the largest advocacy groups for men as it relates to the space is called the MRA. It's called the Men's Rights Association. And you know what they did? Women labeled it a hate group because they said that it tears down the idea that women's rights and feminism and it goes against everything that feminism stands for. But there are advocacy groups such as the men's rights groups, and you can actually identify it as one of the most popular films on Amazon called Red Pill. And it was a woman that was a former feminist that documented it and showed how slanted it was against men and how society is trying to down this whole group because it doesn't support the narrative behind feminism. You should do some research because there are huge.
No, I hear what you're saying, and I'm not saying that they don't exist, but I really want to say, Anton, it's men like what we were talking about with me and you. The fact that what we're talking about with being a beta and an alpha, I really feel it goes back to this level of vulnerability that a man has because they feel they're going to get ridiculed by somebody that thinks like you about what is the ideal man. And I feel that because of not the advocacy groups, they exist. But even if they exist, do you actually have men that will take advantage of it? No, they will not, because they feel they will not be supported, not by women, but by fellow men.
Not only does society put those pressures on men, men also want to fulfill those ideologies, and they want to, present themselves as this macho superhero man, like I can't be vulnerable and I can't be hurt. And I think that they see that as a weakness. And a lot of times men don't even want to report it because they're stigmatized from that whole entire process. They feel like it's going to stigmatize me. So why even go there? And
there are no true safe spaces for men. I agree. There are, even though we say that, and I get it. I'm not too familiar with the men's organization. I have heard of it. They exist. Don't get me wrong. But the thing is, it is not embraced. It is not supported. It is not based on supporting the framework of what an ideal man represents. And that's part of the problem, that we're not going to pursue these opportunities because you know what? That's not the man that my fellow peer will also view me as. And also, it's this fear that a woman may find me as being invulnerable. And they may not want to be with me because, you know what, I'm not the man that I'm supposed to be, or what we assume they should.
But I guess my problem though is that none of that is relevant to this conversation, simply because there are cases and there are reports and there are men that come forward and say, yo, crime is crime. And that has nothing to do with being manly or being a man or reporting it or anything. Most of the time, men that report crimes against them, such as domestic violence and things like that, are men being proactive in protecting themselves against a future issue as it relates to that specific woman. Like, for example, these men's rights groups, a lot of it is based off of the issues surrounding the problems where we say that things are equal, but they really aren't. Most of them are as it relates to the courts. When you go to court as a man, for example, if a woman automatically in certain states put your name on a birth certificate, whether or not you took a paternity test or not, if she wants to get certain benefits from the state and she has to put a man's name on the birth certificate, that man is automatically required to pay child support, whether or not he's the child's father or not, whether or not it's proven that he's the child's father or not, and he can go to jail for that. So what I'm saying is, issues are issues and crimes are crimes. And when you talk about how men are getting railroaded, overwhelmingly, there aren't a lot of cases. There aren't highlighted problems as it relates to women lying against men or women emasculating men for reporting certain crimes. But then at the same time, you'll have these same women advocating for and saying feminism rights, women's rights, equal rights, and they'll support all of these narratives, but they're not supporting it equally on both sides. So from my perspective, if we want to say that society are painting this narrative, what is society made of? Society is made up of the people. And the people are
it's made up of the people. Well, you think about it, the men are the people who actually still carry out a lot of the rules and norms that we live by. Go back to Terry Crews. What Terry Crews mentioned when he was abused, he was raped, he was clowned. Terry Crews was clowned, and we were part of that group. Not us personally, but specifically us as Black folks, we clowned this man. So the thing is, that gave an example where as a society, we could have rallied together and say that's not right. But if anything, he was ridiculed. So now that set us back as far as men of anything moving forward about being vocal about wrongdoing.
Yeah.
But my point is that being a man and being an alpha has nothing to do with domestic abuse and crime being perpetuated against you, is what I'm saying. So when we define what an alpha and a beta is, an alpha and a beta has nothing to do with whether or not somebody is doing something against you that they're not supposed to be doing. And when that situation happens, there is a double standard as it relates to men and women, and it's an issue. And I think that along with women advocating for and people advocate, because it's men and women advocating for the benefits and rights of women and all of that. And I think that that's fair. I think that women deserve the right to vote. They deserve all of the same benefits as it pertains to men. But at the same time, when it comes to the stuff that negatively that men suffer through, when it comes to these issues and these problems as it relates to the courts, it shouldn't be based off of gender. It shouldn't be based off of whether or not you're a man or a woman. If it's a crime, it's a crime. If a woman should not be able to do and have ultimately by default some of the rights that they have if we advocating for equal across the board. You got to address it on every level. You can't just say it's a woman thing or a man should be a man when it benefits you. Crime is crime, issues is issues. And when a chick do something like assault a dude, because a chick can grab a gun, she can hit a dude, she can grab a bat, she can do a lot of stuff. That don't make me any less of an alpha, but what it does is it makes me more cautious as to and proactive when it relates to her, because society has said that I can't do things a certain way, and by default, she's going to get the benefit of the doubt. And that's unfortunate.
It's not that clear cut, Anton.
No,
I hear where you're coming from, and I know that you're looking at it from a neutral aspect. Right is right, wrong is wrong, a crime is a crime. But the thing is, there's a level of bias in which lawmakers are involved with, people who are part of the jury, and the public perception. So the thing is, you can't sit here and act like, oh yeah, all we need to do is just look at the crime. That's part of the issue. There's so much level of bias. The whole system is convoluted. But I want to say, as a man, we perpetuate the double standard because the thing is, we don't support our fellow brothers. And this is something that I see, that women are more likely to uplift, mobilize, and really execute uplifting protest versus men to support another man.
B-Nix, I think it would change your perspective if you've seen some of these documentaries like The Red Pill that highlight men that support men and men advocating for men and the type of resistance that they receive from
Anton, I'm not saying those exist, but you really are acting like you're ignoring the reality of this.
That the same way that, I'll give you the perfect example. The same way that we say as Black people, and we emphasize that it's not enough just for Black people to advocate for equal rights, and we say everybody got to get involved. It don't matter what color you are. Black Lives Matters. We want it to change on a systematic level. We have all of these conversations that involve the entirety of the population. It has to be the same thing, because you're not going to change the courts as it relates to how they view men and how crime is perpetuated and how it's reported. You're not going to change it when you have so many people benefiting from it, mainly women, mainly lawyers, mainly prosecutors, mainly people that are making sure that their numbers are accurate, such as the prosecutors, Kamala Harris. I'm not even going to throw that out there. But when you have these people that's all benefiting from this system that's set up to be biased towards men, you have to have participation from people, from more than just the people that it's affecting, is all I'm saying. So if you want change within the system, it has to be more than men. And not only when men are protesting, but they're ultimately also meeting resistance from the very people that don't want the system to change. So it's more than just men supporting men. There has to be a complete revamp and overhaul of how we think and approach circumstances and situations. When you only have 2 in the entire United States domestic abuse shelters for men, that's an issue. That's not something that we can just overlook and say, oh, that's because men ain't supporting men. Yo, that's an issue. And that's something bigger than men supporting men. There needs to be, if we're going to advocate from all spectrums and say that there needs to be equal across the board, then make it equal as it relates to resources, as it relates to the courts, as it relates to everything that we're doing to support and help women. It has to be equal across the board. It can't be one.
Anton, I hear what you're saying. I understand the concept and the theoretical frame in which you're talking about. But the reality of it is, and that's no offense to Tawana as being our woman on the show, I want to remove women from this conversation where the thing you say, it should be equal. Men do not treat other men equally. The issue starts right there. And I'm not trying to negate the thoughts of any women or based on their sexual orientation. But the thing is, men do not support other men. And if I compare the group of how men support men the way women support women, it is not equal, brother.
Hey,
Men are more, yes, go ahead. Go ahead. I think men are more vulnerable with women in most cases, and I don't think that men feel that they have the room or the space to open up to other men in a vulnerable way. And I do think that creates an issue. Because when you see, when Anton talks about advocacy groups, the primary people in the advocacy groups are the people that are heavily affected by that movement. So you can't expect a woman to be like the forefront of the men abuse movement, right? Like you have to be a man who is like, this is an issue in our community, right? And I need you guys to kind of jump on board, just like with the Black Lives Matter. It would be almost a joke if there were other races the forefront of it. Like we need to be at least a little bit more connected to. Okay, I'm not saying that it's not diversity in those movements. What I'm saying
not only is it not
that we have to be. No, what I'm saying is you as a man, if you feel connected to a movement, you have to be the voice of your own entire movement. You can't expect a woman. Women are the voice of our movement. Most of our movements, we are the voice of them because we clearly know what the issues are in our community.
These Black Lives Matter movements.
I'm sorry that men, if you don't report it, if it's no trend, if we don't know what's going on, if there's going to be this societal pressure to adhere to, how exactly do you expect women to connect with that in any way? Like, we don't know that because women are more like vocal about what they're going through, and that's just what it is. I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm just in agreement with what B Nix is saying as far as men having to be able to create that space for themselves. That's all.
I don't know if you're familiar with what's going on with this Black Lives Matter movement, but the overwhelming majority of the protesters are not Black. The people that are at the forefront of the movement, there may be people that are held up as the trophies, right? The people that are the head of the organization, but the overwhelming majority of the people that's in this movement are not Black. If you look at the traction that was received even during the civil rights movements.
Okay. I mean, I guess I guess.
Yeah, and honestly, Anton, I'm a little mixed on that. Are you saying that's cool? Is that okay? Because the thing is like, if anything, it's almost kind of contradictory to the movement itself. If you got a group of people speaking on behalf of the people that are oppressed or that are impacted. I agree with what Tawana said. It's like, so you're saying that I get to be diverse and equity, but you're saying basically women need to be the forefront of a male's movement?
No, what I'm saying is that it's not unreasonable to ask for fair to be fair. And what
it's just more white people in the world. It's like, I hate when people say that. They're like, oh, it's more Black. No, Black people brought the issues to the forefront. Yes, white people support us and they came behind us and they're like, yeah, we back you up. But we are the reason why the movements exist. We're the reason why. We had to bring our own issues to people. What are y'all talking about? It's just it's so ridiculous. I understand that there are more whites that are being highlighted because they are, you know,
I understand that there's more women.
The fight. But there are Black people who started the movement. We are the ones who brought it to the attention of the white people. The people who were able to assimilate, the people who were able to get in line and say, look, I have these friends that I can align with that I'm going to start to convince about, hey, this is what we're going through. And then that's why there is a lot of diversity in the movement. But don't confuse that with they are the ones who started our movement. That is ridiculous.
I think you
Anton, brother, I get where you're coming from. I really do.
She's hearing what
but I mean, I'm in disagreement on this one.
That's fair. That's
fine.
We
just disagree. It's not like I'm hearing what I want to hear. I just disagree with you. That's all.
You're hearing what you want to hear, but the fact remains.
Exactly what you're saying.
You got to let me finish a sentence too. But you're hearing what you want to hear.
Same with you. You interrupted me. So let's not go there like, oh, I'm interrupting you. We did the same
I didn't
thing.
say you can't interrupt me. I said you got to let me finish a sentence. You can interrupt me all you want. I'm fine. That's part of the debate. But my point remains, it doesn't really matter how you frame it. And we can go back and forth about how certain movements and all of this other type of stuff and how it goes about. The fact remains is that fair is fair. And I think that regardless of whether or not we agree on the tactics that should be taken as it relates to how we solve the problem, we all agree and acknowledge that it's a problem and that there is a bias and an unfair system that's related to men as it relates to how much justice or how much credibility we have or how many resources or how we're supported when it comes to domestic violence or issues or crime against the men. So we can all disagree or try to debate what the solution is, but it doesn't change the narrative. The narrative remains the same. It's unfair when it comes to men and certain things in society, especially as it relates to domestic abuse, such as what the subject matter of JR just posted. And I don't think that should ever be debated. Men need more help when it comes to the things that we're suffering from a societal norm, when it comes to our credibility, when domestic violence is perpetuated against us, because we'll show up when it's somebody from another race perpetuating domestic violence against a Black man, for example, but we won't show up when it's a woman. Then it's credibility issues or problems and all of that. And that is that's the most hypocritical thing ever, because violence against a human is violence against the human, and that should never be debated. We can't have that problem. And the bigger problem and the bigger issue for me is even when we see women, like they're proven to lie against the man. They could say a guy raped them, and then these guys get out of prison 10 years later after a DNA test said that they wasn't even there. And then the woman could even admit, okay, I said it because I was ashamed. Nothing happens to that woman outside of maybe her credibility. There is very few and far in between. And I've done extensive research on this about how women are dealt with when it comes to these laws pertaining to men. And that's why you see an overwhelming majority of men over women. In prison, there's a large disparity. And when we have disparities against Black people, we always highlight it and we say that's an issue and we need to change the system and all these things. But when it comes to men versus women, that's never going to be something that we want to address, because too many people, such as how Tawana highlighted, there's more women on this earth than there are men. And there are more women that benefit from this whole system in place to make sure that we take away the credibility of men when it comes to these certain issues than there ever will be men that can advocate against it. That's always going to be a problem. And I don't see how we can even debate that.
You know, but the thing is, Anton, I get what you're saying, but I almost still want to remove women from this conversation, where I feel like men still, there's a level of privilege that men have on this earth, in which, like you mentioned about equal opportunity, men are still primarily the ones that are in policy. Men are primarily the people who have money, who have earnings in order to create these settings in different neighborhoods and these different advocacy groups. I feel that there's a divide when, even though you're talking about the law and you're talking about advocacy, I feel that there's still an aspect within men. There's always like a subpopulation. Same way we talk about skin color. Even though we're talking about a group of people, there's always a subpopulation of people within a group. So the thing is, within the group of men, I believe there's a subpopulation of people that is very significant that actually does not support other men when it comes to certain things that are not deemed as manly. And the reason I go back to the alpha male and the beta male conversation, because that was, again, it's historical. We've seen how we have perception of what is considered a strong, kind of more direct, a more kind of general man versus someone that may be more submissive. Because I think that if there is an act of abuse in which the man is a victim, they're also labeled as not being a man, being the type B, being the submissive man, or allowing that to happen. Because the first thing they will say, anecdotally, to say that wouldn't happen to me. Like, what type of man is he to allow himself to be abused, to be victimized, to be raped?
A woman can lie on a guy, and you know what the default thing is from a police perspective of what's supposed to happen? If a woman even lies on a guy and says, he did something to me, by default, he goes to jail for 3 days. By default. Ain't no getting out early, ain't no getting bail. We gonna figure this out afterwards. So my point is it doesn't even matter of whether or not he's a man or not, or he's an alpha, or if a guy said it never happened to me. Again, I don't know how we can put a but in this conversation. There is no but. If a dude goes through something, and it don't matter what class of guy you are, no matter how much money you got, what color you are, if somebody does something against you and it's a woman, that's an issue. I don't know how we can put a but in there.
And they should report it. And they shouldn't feel any type of reservation about reporting it. And I think that men should just, from this conversation, understand that, you know, that it's important for you guys to start to speak up and talk about the things that you're experiencing. And if you are being abused, it's okay to report it. It's okay. And you should not be shamed for it. And no person in their right mind, there are men who will shame you, but there are women also that will shame you. And I think that there's no person in their right mind that would shame you for reporting this.
So that's just, and then what goes along with that, a part of that conversation is, why is it okay? Okay, so the guy says something, such as the husband of Tamar Braxton, right? And then the overwhelming majority of the people in the comments is women like, nah, sis, like that ain't happen. You're like, y'all pick and choose when y'all want to support, when it's convenient for y'all. And if it doesn't, in my opinion,
well, check out the shade.
Majority of these situations, if y'all don't feel like y'all got a dog in a fight and it doesn't benefit you guys in some way, shape, or form. Because like, for example, when we say black, that pertains to both women and men. If women don't in some way, in most situations, somehow benefit from it, then they don't have a dog in a fight. I don't see women in any way, shape, or form supporting men when it comes to equal rights as it relates to domestic abuse, what happens in our court systems, men versus women, custody battles, none of that stuff. All of the conversations, even when we have it online, of whether or not a guy is taking care of his kids, is when we was talking about the whole Dr. Dre thing, bro. I seen so many posts of people like, I mean, that's her lifestyle. She deserved that. When a dude take a chick to the cleaners, dog, it's a whole uproar. It's a completely different narrative, a whole nother conversation. You know why? Because women don't benefit from that in no way, shape, or form. So yes, there is a huge gap and a huge divide when it comes to the standards as it relates to men and women in these certain circumstances and situations. It's crazy, and I don't even know how women even justify that this makes sense in their mind.
But also, I feel like that's one-sided, Anton, where I feel like men, again, my angle is that men don't support other men. That's something I've been very consistent with this evening, where I feel that that's still something that there's a strong level of bias in the subculture of men, regardless of color, that men do not support other men. You mentioned about picking and choosing. Men pick and choose on what they advocate for to support, and I get it exists. You know, we could check the box and say, oh, yeah, there's an advocacy group for vets. There's an advocacy group for men that's gay. There's an advocacy group for men that's been abused, sexually abused, verbally abused. Now, do men, and maybe I'm just thinking about my circle. Maybe I'm personalizing this. The men that I know in my circle, they're not going to say nothing. They're going to eat it. Because the thing is, guess what? That's what we have, this idea of what it means to be a man. You deal with shit, right? You push through it. So the thing is, if you're not strong enough to push through it, what are you called? You're called soft. So that's the thing. Men create these titles to label other men that are not deemed as being strong enough to handle the pressures of the world. That's something that we create within our own subpopulation of just being a man. And that's separate from women. So I'm not even really engaging them on trying to compare apples to apples, because I feel like it's a little bit different. Men are also just as tough on men about not advocating for our fellow brothers.
Hey, Nix, I want to put the women back into. I know you keep taking the women out of it, but I want to get your opinion about the women. Do you feel like the women support the men when they are victims of abuse?
That's for me?
Yeah, that's for you.
All the time.
You said what? How?
Oh my God.
Speak on it.
I just feel they do. I mean, you know, if anything, I want to say we go back to just folks' moms in general. You know what I mean? I feel like it's in the nature of most women that I know from my circle that they are going to support. They're going to support men. So the thing is, do we ever really go to our fathers for that level of support with our own vulnerability? No, we don't. We go to our moms. I know for a fact I would go to my mom or my grandma if I really need to be supported on some shit that's vulnerable, because I don't feel comfortable enough having the space to talk about this with another man, because men don't have a lot of spaces to talk about real shit that's going on in their lives. So that's why the rationale you asked, I'm basing this on my own personal experience that I feel that women do support men. Now, if you could give me an example, we could contextualize this, but if we're talking about in general, then I would say yes.
Okay, well, let's talk about Joe Budden.
Hey, can I stop though? Can I stop? Because the thing is, I'm gonna ask you also about, because I said yes, you seemed like you were surprised. So I want to ask you the question on, were you surprised by my answer, and why would you be surprised? Because you made it seem as if women do not support men.
I'm not saying all women don't support men, but there are a lot of women that do not support men. Like, we rarely hear about men speaking up about abuse, you know, for various reasons. You know, such like you said that, you know, men want to be macho, men want to be tough. You know, they're going to be looked at down on from other men. But I think it's from women as well. I don't think women are totally innocent when it comes to looking down. Like, I think that men do need the support of the women, because if you look, especially with all the social media that's going on, you just hear so much, down talk against the men. And for example, like the whole Joe Budden, I don't know the whole situation, but I'm just trying to take an example out of it. And in the beginning, he didn't mention anything about Sin was throwing things at him, Sin was abusing him, Sin was slapping him, and everything that she was doing. It wasn't until after he was being talked about, when women were dragging him. It was mostly women that were just dragging him. He decided to speak up on him and say, hey, she's not innocent in here. So it could have been a situation where she was doing things to him, which caused him to react. We don't know, but it's kind of funny how when you read these things, you hear these stories, women don't support him. They were just straight bashing Joe Budden.
And also along with that, you could take the whole Tahiri and Vado thing, right? It was highlighted when Vado grabbed her up, right? On that it was highlighted. But nobody talked about the fact that she was throwing stuff at his head and all of that prior to. Now, of course, we're not saying that it's justified for Vado to grab her up and all of that. But at the same time, there is a huge disparity in why was she allowed and not held to the fire for the stuff that she was doing that perpetuated the behavior in the first place. And so that's what I'm saying. There's a huge gap between how we hold men accountable and how we hold women accountable. And when people do stuff that's not right, I think that people should be held accountable for their actions. Each individual. You can't pick and choose and say, well, that's a man, well, that's a woman, or society is saying, yo, if you want it to be right and you want it to be equal and you want things to be, on an even playing field for everybody and for everybody to be held accountable according to their actions, you can't say, okay, I only want to do it when it suits me, or only when it's pertaining to Black people, or only when it pertains to women. You have to do it across the board, or else you're never going to have an equal playing field for anybody. It's always going to be an issue, and ain't nobody going to support men if everybody don't get involved. When you see your homegirl doing something, when girls see their homegirls doing something, they don't be like, girl, whatever, such and such. They get their claws out though when the dude do something. I'll be over there. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy how, because when dudes do something, I do know guys that step up like, hold on, fam, you can't be doing that. Like, me and my dudes, we hold each other accountable, straight up. If my homeboy called me and was like, yo, fam, this is a situation I think it's abusive, dog, she pissing me off. I'm like, man, get up out of there, man. Don't even deal with her, bro. Like, I'm giving him the steps and the advice and saying, yo, you don't want to deal with that chick. But when it comes to women supporting men, or women is automatically going to be on the side of women, and they're going to err on the side of women when it comes to the possibility of somebody doing something wrong. They always going to first hold the guy's feet to the fire before they hold the woman's feet to the fire, even if the woman is dead wrong. And I think that's a problem. That's a huge problem within our culture and our society. And it's not right. And you can clearly see that when it came to that posting with Tamar Braxton. Women was dragging the dude even though he was the victim. That's unfortunate. That's unfortunate for me.
Yeah, I agree with you on this one, Anton. But actually, I don't want to deal with you right now. I'm going back to JR. So the thing is, JR, you mentioned about earlier when you was talking about how this came out after the fact, and Joe Budden didn't mention, because for all we know, we're not in a relationship. This could have been some other abuse issues. Nothing. We all know for a fact nothing happens overnight. So JR, what can you assume from your perspective as to why didn't Joe Budden come forth with this information at first onset when this was happening, with this not even physical abuse, but I'm assuming probably verbal abuse that was taking place? Why didn't he come forth? Or maybe he did, and maybe he wasn't embraced. But why would you feel that there could be a possibility that he didn't tell anyone?
Well, as I said before, I actually gave you credit. And I actually said that I believe that he was going to be looked down upon men as being a pussy. And, same thing like with women. And he was going to probably hear it more from the women saying that he's playing a victim. And the key thing is he's playing a victim, even though he might have been the victim. So I think he just kept it on the hush in the beginning until he started reading in the media. Actually, I was listening to his live when he went live, and he was just saying, he just couldn't take it no more. The truth has to come out. And so he said his piece in order to try to, save his image, because the women were coming for him. They were coming for him. So with him being in that spotlight, he had to say something. What'd you say?
I hear you. I hear you. I hear what you're saying.
I hope so. All right, we're gonna put this.
I hear your perspective. I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
So wait a minute. Before we wrap this up, because I know we're about to wrap this up, this particular subject. B-Nick, so where do you stand on this in a general sense as it relates to just the subject as a whole? Not on any specific thing that was particularly said, but what are your general thoughts about the disparity, or there being a perceived disparity as it relates to how men get treated versus how women get treated in these situations?
I got two answers. Part of my answer actually supports what you're talking about focusing on a crime as a crime. I always look at it, wrong is wrong, right is right. But I feel that there is a level, a subculture that exists in our society for men, that men are not empowered to speak out about issues that may negatively impact them. And I believe that men, regardless of how many women organizations that we may have, if we want to compare ourselves to how women are able to advocate and mobilize, unfortunately, men still hold many positions of power. And the thing is, I believe that because of our level of privilege that men do have, we do not exercise our right to empower our fellow brothers when there is wrongdoing, far as some type of abuse. I would almost even compare it to like how we call out white folks and not utilizing their white privilege. I feel men don't utilize their male privilege in order to empower more men to speak out in order to change the narrative. I love your idea, like you talked about, with just being fair, us being equal. It is a double standard. It does exist. But I also feel that men don't truly empower other men to really speak out and leverage their power to say that, you know what, this is wrong, because we don't talk. And this comes up in many aspects of our society where men just do not talk. Men don't really talk about anything outside of like the more comfortable topics because we have a fear of being ridiculed. So I don't know if that's really a clear answer. My first answer related to just the fact of, yeah, right is right, wrong is wrong. There is a double standard in our society. But my second answer is that we are part of the double standard, because we do not, we do have advocacy groups, but we do not empower other men to be able to feel comfortable as a present day in 2020 to be able to speak out against wrongdoing in which the man is the victim.
Bro, I'm gonna send you some, honestly, like when this is all over and done, tomorrow morning, I'm just gonna send you a documentary. It's free to watch.
Dude, I don't want none of your materials right now. I will look at it.
Because you need to see the other side of this, bro. You really do need to see the other side of this, man. And I think it's unfortunate if you don't look at it from both perspectives, just to take an objective look at what the truth really is.
No, I don't think you get the truth, man. I think that you're ignoring everything that I've been saying tonight, bro. You act like that it don't, like you're a man, and I feel like you should kind of understand at least the aspect that there are other men that are biased against other men, and you're acting like there's no true bias.
There's other women that are biased against other women. It doesn't stop the whole narrative behind how they're trying to progress as a unit. There's always going to be outliers in this particular situation of any sort.
These aren't no outliers. Outliers are like one or two, or like the minority. This is the majority.
Okay, so if it's a huge group, it doesn't even matter. There's people that, like myself, that don't necessarily agree with the particular group of Black Lives Matter. It doesn't change the narrative of the movement that you guys support and moving towards, there's always going to be resistance from different types of people, even people that look like you in that specific realm. But it doesn't change the fact that we still need to be objective and be able to look at both sides and both situations with equal amount of information in order to make an informed opinion. I'm not saying you need to see it from my perspective. I'm just saying that I don't think it's unreasonable for you to look at both sides of the narrative in order to make a more informed opinion about the circumstance or the situation. I don't see that as unreasonable.
I just don't feel like you see my perspective. That's how I feel right now. I feel like every time I say something, you come with a counter argument that, again, realigns with your perspective.
Because
I feel like it's two sides of the story, and you're making it just a one-sided story.
Because I don't agree. And it's not that I'm not listening to your perspective. I just think you dead wrong when it comes to this particular subject.
I disagree.
Tawana, like as the young man was going back and forth, I kind of seen you shaking your head. So based on what you've heard, and we're going to wrap this up, do you feel as though Anton has listened to B-Nick's point?
Absolutely not. And I do think that there's just a few points that basically the entire point of this conversation is that men don't report it until it's a crisis, or they don't report it and they don't feel like they have the room to report it. And I think that if you don't acknowledge that men have this societal pressure to, be this macho, masculine person, and then they feel like they're stigmatized when they report this. If you don't even acknowledge that, then you can't begin to scratch the surface. And also, I guess it just depends on what types of group you associate yourself with, because I saw a lot of backlash against Tamar and her being toxic and her being loud and she's rude, she's disrespectful, and I can see why he, blah, blah, blah. Like, a lot of people were bashing her. And so I think that it's just always, people's perspective and how they view things. And you can go to the Shade Room comments right now and see them like bashing her behavior on the show and seeing how she could be abusive because of the way she behaves and this, that, and the third. And these are women, not men, also talking about it. So I just feel like we can always present this one-sided view. And I don't deal with generalization, so I don't want to even begin to address that. But I'm just going to let you know that absolutely I don't feel like B-Nix was like heard and understood. Like, I do think you acknowledged it, JR, at one point. But I do think he just has some amazing points. So I don't know if I want to be there.
Well, I'm not trying to have you pick sides. I think the whole point of Anton was basically saying just look at it from both perspectives, which I've heard that same argument with various topics that we discuss, is just be open-minded. I think that's how we grow. That's how we learn, just by being open to hearing.
And I believe that B-Nix was, though, looking at it from both perspectives. I don't really see that he's being one side. Like, I do think he has his position and he's stuck with it. But I guess maybe if you don't acknowledge that you agree with somebody, then it looks like that you don't, like, you're not looking at it from their perspective. But even you guys will talk about the
you guys never even acknowledge. It's funny, JR, because we're talking about Tamar getting bashed, but the conversation never came to her man getting supported. And that's the whole narrative, is that there's no support for men. We're not looking for bashing of another person. We look in support for the victim. And along with that, it's just ironic how they say that I never acknowledged how I've never acknowledged their point, but they've never fully acknowledged that there's a disparity between guys and girls. The whole conversation and the narrative that they were making were completely
different. I just acknowledged you stating that there was a double standard.
Okay.
You know what, Anton?
That's fine.
I think the only thing that was that I was listening to was that B-Nix kept taking women out of the situation. He kept defending women, and I'm just like, every woman is not innocent. Like, I believe that there's a lot of women that do not support men, period. Like, when it comes to that, I'm not saying all. The only thing we just saying is just be open and saying, okay, yeah, I agree, there are some. But it's just like, no, let's just take women away. And I'm just like, well, that's not being open. and not giving
Of course, there are some. There are some women who perpetuate the entire masculine mentality and gender. You know,
and
like,
you're taking what I'm saying. For those particular points, I was focusing on just men. But the thing is, then when you ask me, do I feel that women support men? I said yes, and then that wasn't good enough either. So the thing is, I really feel that, you know what? I don't know between you or Anton that y'all do this shit every time, man. The thing is, you ask that brother to be open-minded. You always come at me asking me that I need to be open-minded about his perspective.
Y'all not open-minded. Not at all.
What am I not open-minded about?
Like, I guess we're going to like agree to disagree on this.
There you go. Let's do that.